In Moscow, Kremlin opposition leader Alexey Navalny will return to prison over probation violation charges. He's been sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. The ruling comes 2 weeks after Navalny was arrested after arriving back in Moscow from Berlin. Navalny spent 5 months there recovering from a nerve agent poisoning he blames the Kremlin for carrying out. For more on all this, I want to bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Holly Williams. Hi, Holly. Great to see you. Walk us through how this hearing played out in court today.
Well, Alexey Navalny's supporters, and in fact, Alexey Navalny himself, have made it clear that they felt this court appearance, this sentencing, was everything to do with politics and nothing to do with the law. Navalny was accused by the Russian authorities of breaching probation conditions of a 2014 conviction for financial crimes, a conviction that he also said, and his supporters said, was trumped up and was political in nature. And in fact, the European Court of Human Rights found that conviction back in 2014 unlawful. When that sentence was handed down in the court, Navalny denounced the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, and he said, quote, "I have deeply offended him simply by surviving the assassination attempt that he ordered." So he is pointing the finger directly at Russian President Vladimir Putin for that apparent assassination attempt. You'll remember that a recent report linked it to Russian intelligence officers.
And Holly, the massive protests across Russia in response to Navalny's arrest, do you expect those demonstrations to increase now that Navalny has been sentenced to prison? Will they eventually die out? I mean, obviously, that's what the Kremlin is hoping will happen, but what is the indication on the ground?
I think it's the long-term answer to that. It's difficult to predict, but I think in the short term, we certainly expect them to continue. As you say, they have been massive, tens of thousands of people in scores of cities across Russia in freezing conditions, and despite some pretty brutal tactics from the Russian police. Today, in the aftermath of this sentencing, Navalny's supporters have already called for protests in central Moscow, and we spoke earlier today, before the sentencing, with one of Navalny's political allies, Vladimir Ashrikov, and he said to us, look, if Navalny is locked up, that will simply have the effect of multiplying the protests.
So interesting. A lot of Russian observers have said the tenor of these protests is different to what they've seen before. How is President Putin addressing these protests? And on a certain level, is every time that he addresses it directly, doesn't it elevate Navalny's standing?
Well, perhaps. I mean, the authorities have detained more than 5,000 people during these protests that have occurred over the last couple of weeks. They've been pretty heavy-handed. The police have employed some pretty brutal tactics. One thing that we have heard from Putin in recent days is that he has denied allegations that he owns and received as a bribe a palatial mansion on the Black Sea coast in Russia. Because despite everything that's been going on, despite the poisoning, Navalny's detention when he returned to Russia, and these protests and the crackdown on them, his organization had time to release a video in which they accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of corruption, and specifically of receiving this palatial, opulent mansion as a bribe. And Vladimir Putin denied that he was, in fact, the owner of that mansion.
Interesting. All right. Well, Holly Williams in London, thank you so much.